Hey guys, GGNG here, and I'm going to talk about towers in Dota 2 for this video. It's going to be sort of a little incoherent and casual because I don't really want to do a formal video for this. It doesn't really lend itself well to like a guide or anything. But yeah, I want to talk about towers because I don't really see a lot of people or like a lot of information out there regarding towers in Dota, so I thought I would sort of speak on the subject. Now, before we actually like talk about what I want to talk about, let's just go over what a tower actually does in the game. So a tower is basically a structure that gives you vision, does damage, so it prevents pushes, and it allows you to TP to it. And it also prevents enemies from kind of going certain places on the map because they're scared of the damage and the TP potential. So there are these 6 towers on each side, and they're all in different places. What I mean by that is that no 2 towers in the game give the same things basically. One tower is always going to give like more map control, or it's going to be more valuable than another tower, and that's because the map is not symmetrical, right? There are different things on different sides of the map, so towers are going to be valued differently, and they're going to give different amounts of map control and priority depending on where they are. So because the towers have different amounts of map control, there's a thing as more valuable towers compared to other towers. So oftentimes if you like listen to casts or just in general like people talking about pro games, you often see teams go for tower trades, and the caster will say something like, oh, they traded a safe lane T1 tower for their offlane T2 tower or something. And they'll be like, oh, that's a good trade, or like, that's a bad trade. Like, oh, they got Roshan, but they lost their mid tower, that's a good trade, or something like that. Basically, like, they judge the value of towers compared to other things. And that's what I sort of want to talk about. Just like how to value the different towers on that map. I'm just going to go ahead and start with the Radiant Safe Lane Tower, which is commonly accepted to be the most valuable tower in the game. Some people might consider the mid towers to be pretty valuable, but I think most people would agree that the Radiant Safe Lane is the most valuable tower. Now, the reason for this is, if you just look at the mini-map that I have here, every tower kind of has like a sphere of influence. Because you can TP to the tower, you kind of have map control near the tower. So, the Radiant T1 tower is near these 3 camps that I marked in yellow. It's the closest tower to Roshan and the bottom rune. And it's pretty much just controls like, okay, so if you're on Radiant, you have like this half of the map at the beginning of the game, right? So it controls basically right here. So that's like a third, I want to say. I'm not really great at geometry or whatever this is, but that's basically like a third of your map control. If you lose this Radiant T1 tower, then you lose a third of your map control. So it's very valuable. Now, so the Radiant Safe Lane Tower is probably the best tower in the game. Compare that to the Dire Safe Lane Tower. What this tower gives you is control over these 2 camps, basically, and a little control over here. So if I was gonna mark this, I would say that it gives you like this. Actually, that's probably a little bit too big. Gives you like this. Now compare that to the dire map control. It's really not that big of a portion compared to the Radiant side. So the dire safe lane tower is really not as valuable. If you're like, if you have a chance to prevent a trade, if you're on the Radiant side, you should always try to. Like, you don't want to trade their safe lane tower for your safe lane tower. Obviously, it's not going to be as like straightforward, cut and dry, like one tower for another. The exact same amount of time, exact same amount of like investment for the tower trades. But if it was like that, you wouldn't want to trade for it. Now, oh, also I forgot to mention that the dire safe lane tower, it's not really near anything. Just looking at the map, it's near the camps. It's near the rune, sort of, but just like the fact that there's nothing on the Radiant side because of the way the map is just created, there's like nothing over here, so this tower is not worth as much as this tower. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the mid towers. The mid towers for the Radiant and Dire side are relatively equal. They give basically the same amount of control over the same space, basically, which is like over here. That's basically what the towers are gonna give you. So they're both like the same distance to the runes. They both control paths into the jungle, and they both control paths into the ancients. I would say that the Dire side is a little bit more valuable because the Dire Ancients are now a bit more vulnerable, and the Radiant Ancients are pretty hard to contest anyway, even if the tower is down. I will say though that the entrance into the jungle for the Dire side is a lot weaker than this entrance over here. So I would value the Dire T1 a little bit higher than the Radiant T1. But they're both very important towers to have, just to control, like, you get to see who goes back and forth between these two halves of the map, and it also makes warding along the river significantly easier. It makes TP supporting into any like fights or skirmishes for the runes or along the river a lot better, so it's always very important to have your mid tower up. Okay, so I'll talk about the offlane towers last. I'll do the T2s for the safe lane and mid. I don't think the T2s matter too much for the safe lanes. They're obviously nice to have, but if you just look at the Radiant safe lane T2 compared to the T1, like the T2 doesn't really give you anything that the T1 doesn't give you. It makes farming like over here slightly safer, but like you're still not really comfortable farming these camps if your Radiant T1 is down and you don't have like vision of them. So it doesn't increase the amount of farm space you have really, and it doesn't really like let you TP into anything. The only reason you want to TP to this safe lane T2 tower is probably to defend it. You're not going to TP to it to like go walk into a Roche fight or whatever unless you're like really pressed for time. Usually you just want to walk over here. Sorry, I don't know if that made any sense, but hopefully it did. Or else it just ignored me. Okay, so the Dire safe lane T2. It's a bit more important because it controls these two camps a little bit, and this one as well. So you sort of feel safe farming these three camps. Maybe not this one, because this one's a little dangerous. But you feel sort of safe farming these two camps if your tower is up. If you don't know what I mean by like feeling safe, I'm sure you've had like games where your towers fall, and like I don't know if this comes with just like playing a lot or like good map sense, but like you know sometimes like you don't feel safe farming somewhere, and that's because your tower is down. And if your tower was up, you would definitely feel safe farming there. Hopefully that made sense. And that's how like I value, like I'm putting value on the towers because of that. Because they're like giving you farming space and map control basically. And it's not just the vision, it's the ability for your team to TP there. So you know if you get ganked, your team can back you up really quickly as opposed to having to walk there or whatever. Okay, so The Dire safe lane T2 is a bit more valuable, I would say. The mid lane towers, I would put them almost completely even, because the Dire side controls like this camp maybe and like this warding spot over here, and the Radiant controls like this camp over here, I guess, and that's pretty much it. So they're pretty much even. It's really, the mid towers on both sides are relatively similar just because of the way the map is composed. I would say the Dire mid towers are slightly more valuable just because Dire always has Roshan and Ancients over here, while Radiant doesn't have anything over here besides their Ancients. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the offlane towers, and this is where the biggest difference in towers probably comes in. I know a lot of people like to shit on the Radiant offlane towers, but I actually think that this T1 is really good. It's obviously not as good as having like Roshan right next to you when you TP to a tower, but like people just like give up the offlane T1 way too easily, I think, in pubs. If you just look at what the offlane tower is near, it's like near this hard camp, and it's near this rune, and that might not seem like much, but again, this is like a feel sort of thing, but if you have this tower up, you feel really comfortable farming this camp sometimes. Not all the time, but like if you've like played a lot of games and you've had this offlane tower up, especially if their T1 tower is down as well, you feel really comfortable farming this hard camp, and you feel slightly comfortable farming this this small camp as well. So basically you're getting 2 extra camps, while for the Dire side, you're not really going to feel comfortable farming this camp because it's way too far away from the tower. The Dire offlane tower, though, does have the Roshan advantage and the Ancient advantage, but I don't value it highly because the offlane T2 tower on the Dire side also gives you pretty much the same thing. So I put these towers like almost like they serve the exact same purpose. While the Radiant side, I feel the offlane T2 is way less valuable than the offlane T1. The offlane T2 tower on the Radiant side, this is probably the worst tower in the game. There's like nothing near this tower. There's the Radiant Ancients, and that's pretty much it. The only thing this tower is really good for is TPing to defend your T1, and you don't want to give away the TPs. I guess that's one of the things, but other than that, it's a pretty worthless tower. I guarantee you, like, half the games, if you started without this tower, you wouldn't even notice. Okay, maybe that's over-exaggerating, but you know what I mean. Okay, so now I sort of want to talk about defending the towers. So obviously we've established that each of the towers gives you like a different amount of value, and likewise each of the towers is different in terms of defense. Some of them are easier to defend, some of them are harder to defend. The mid lane towers are relatively easy to defend. They have this nice high ground to low ground because of the river, so when they're pushing, they have to walk up into the high ground. They have pretty good trees around them. You can hide on both sides. You can hide near the trees under the tower on both sides as well, like over here, over here. It's a pretty good path for flanking around if you want to try to catch them from the side. It's got on both sides like this. So the mid T1s are pretty easy to defend, and it's pretty easy to get some wards and defensive warding around here as well. The safe lane towers are relatively, like compared to the other towers, are pretty hard to defend. They're very vulnerable to aggressive warding, like over here. They're vulnerable to like good flanking from over here because of the jungle, and there's not really much you can do for hiding in the trees. There's like this over here and this over here. The safe lane towers are also the towers that are furthest away from another tower in the game, which makes it even harder to defend. The offlane tower for the T1s, I would say it's like moderately easy to defend because you have these two trees over here, and there's like a flanking opportunity through these paths, but it's not really as dangerous as the safe lane tower defense. For the T2s, I would say that the mid lane towers are roughly the same as the T1s. Like, there's these trees around here you can hide in. It's pretty open and not vulnerable to flanking. Same thing for the dire side. And you have this nice like high ground you can sort of hide in if people are not really warding or paying attention. You can get a nice initiation or something off. The problem with the side lane T2s is that for the side lanes there's this high to low ground over here on both side lanes and for both Dire and Radiant. So like over here and over here. What this high ground to low ground does is that it kind of restricts the area that you have for defense. So because there's a high ground to low ground behind the T2s, you can't really retreat backwards and fight. So if they dive you and you have to give up positioning, you're basically forfeiting the tower because you can't really fight from low ground to high ground. It's just not gonna be good for you. So it kind of restricts you into like this small area over here for each of the side lane T2 towers. Yeah, so it's like really hard to defend against certain lineups if they have good AoE, and it's just not very easy to defend in general because all of them have like some like path for flanking pretty easily as well. The Radiant T2 is also the worst tower to defend, I think, just because of the like surrounding terrain. There's this like really easy flank path. There's like this really nice ward spot over here for people to ward, and like there's like nowhere to hide in these trees. At least for the Dire offlane, you have sort of there's also this ward spot over here that they can put, but you have these nice like this path over here in the trees that you can hide in, and it just goes all the way down through there, and there's like these juke spots in the trees over here. I don't know why, but for some reason there's like this weird gap in the Radiant offlane, and you can't cross into the trees like over the hill. Like, I feel like that makes the Radiant offlane so much worse for some reason. Like, it makes no sense to me, but it just makes like a terrible tower even worse to defend. Alright, so now that I've finished talking about each of the towers, I sort of want to make a point to say that you should be using this information about the different towers in the game and how valuable they are and what it's like to defend them, and use it to make smart decisions on when to take fights around towers and when not to. As I mentioned before, you often see pro teams like trading towers, and I guarantee you that they're always thinking about whether the trade is good for them. There's never going to be a team that's going to be like, oh, let's just trade towers for the hell of it. That's not going to happen in a pro game, and it shouldn't happen in your pub games either. You need to think about what you're giving up when you trade like one tower for another, and what happens when you defend a tower, what you're giving up for it, stuff like that. So I'll give you an example, and this is probably something that that happens in your pub games as well. There will be times where the enemy team groups up to push. Let's say it's like the offlane T1 tower or whatever, and there's like 5 of them grouped up, right? And your team will like furiously ping like, oh, everyone TP top, defend, defend, defend. And sometimes it's really not worth it to TP everyone to defend. Just looking at the map, if you have like 5 people sitting near a tower and there's 5 people pushing, you're wasting a lot of like farming space, you're wasting a lot of time, you're putting yourself at risk of losing a team fight and losing a tower. So it's just like a lot of things that you have to think about when you're defending a tower, whether it's worth it or not, whether it's worth the risk, what could you be doing with the time that you're spending defending a tower, how valuable is the tower that you're defending, is it really worth like losing 2 or 3 heroes over just to defend your offlane T1? Probably not. What about the safe lane T1? Maybe, depending on your situation. Just things that you should think about. Sometimes it's just worth it to let one tower go if it's not worth as much. And just knowing like the difficulty of defense, the amount of map control each tower gives is just stuff that you should take into consideration when judging when to defend towers and when not to. Anyway, I think I've rambled for like a good 25 minutes now, maybe? I don't know. Anyway, I hope you guys liked the video. I understand if it was kind of boring. I know I'm not super interesting to listen to. But if you did like this sort of video, please tell me, because I would be happy to do more of them. They're actually not really hard for me to record and do. So it's a lot of content for little work on my part. So if you do want more of these, I can just pump them out constantly. I can talk for hours and hours about like obscure mechanics in Dota, or like decision making, or just stuff like that. It's part of the reason why I do like playing Dota so much. There's so much to think about. The game has a lot of depth. That's all for now, guys. Hope you have a good Christmas, and I will see you after, probably after the 25th. I'll try to put out a video. But yeah, thanks for watching, and see you guys next time.